Hello and welcome to today's video. Have you ever found yourself lying in bed, eyes wide open, watching the hours slip by while the rest of the world sleeps soundly? If you're over 60, you're not alone. Millions of older adults silently struggle with falling asleep, and even more with staying asleep. What once came naturally now feels like a battle you fight every night. The frustration is real, the exhaustion is constant, and the solution might be a lot simpler than you think. You see, while many people turn to sleeping pills or nighttime teas that promise miracles, the real game changer might already be sitting in your kitchen. Decades of sleep research, combined with the wisdom of nutritional science, have revealed something truly remarkable. Certain natural foods can help reset your internal clock, boost your body's melatonin production, and calm the nervous system, all without side effects or dependency. And this isn't about some exotic superfruit or hard-to-find herb. These are everyday foods you can find at your local grocery store, simple, accessible, and delicious. What matters most is how you use them, when you eat them, and how they work with your body's unique rhythms. In this video, we're going to explore 7 amazing foods that every senior should consider adding to their evening routine. These aren't just recommendations. They're backed by science, real studies, and years of clinical experience working with older adults who want better sleep, more energy, and a peaceful mind. So, before you reach for that sleeping pill or accept another sleepless night as just part of aging, I invite you to stay with me until the end. Because with the right foods, your body already has what it needs to sleep deeply, wake up refreshed, and live each day with strength and clarity. Let's take this journey together, starting now. Let's begin with one of the most surprising sleep aids that's probably already sitting in your fruit bowl, kiwi. This small, fuzzy fruit might not look like much, but what's inside is incredibly powerful when it comes to supporting restful, uninterrupted sleep, especially for seniors. You see, as we age, our melatonin production naturally declines. Melatonin is the hormone that tells your body, hey, it's time to rest. Without enough of it, falling and staying asleep becomes a nightly challenge. But here's where kiwi shines. Studies from the Asia-Pacific Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that adults who ate 2 kiwis 1 hour before bed fell asleep faster, slept longer, and woke up fewer times during the night. In fact, some participants improved their total sleep time by over an hour each night. Imagine what an extra hour of deep, uninterrupted sleep could do for your energy, focus, and even your mood the next day. So why is kiwi so effective? It's packed with serotonin, which your body converts into melatonin. It's also rich in antioxidants like vitamin C and E, as well as folate, all of which support brain health and help reduce the oxidative stress that can disrupt sleep cycles. And perhaps even more important for seniors, kiwi helps calm the nervous system, making it easier to mentally unwind at night, especially if anxiety or racing thoughts have become part of your routine. The best part? It's incredibly easy to add to your evening. You can eat them sliced, add them to yogurt, or blend them into a light bedtime smoothie. So tonight, instead of reaching for a sleeping pill, try reaching for 2 ripe kiwis. It's a natural, effective, and delicious way to start reclaiming the restful nights your body needs and deserves. Coming up next, we'll explore a bright red fruit with some of the highest natural melatonin levels ever recorded. Now, if kiwi was a surprising ally for better sleep, then tart cherries are the superstar you didn't know you needed. These small, sour fruits might not be as popular as bananas or apples, but they're one of the most concentrated natural sources of melatonin on the planet. And for seniors struggling with falling asleep or staying asleep through the night, that's a game changer. In a 2012 study published in the European Journal of Nutrition, researchers discovered that adults who drank tart cherry juice twice a day improved their sleep time by an average of 84 minutes. Yes, you heard that right, nearly an hour and a half of extra sleep per night. So, what makes tart cherries so effective? It starts with melatonin, the hormone your body uses to regulate the circadian rhythm or sleep-wake cycle. As we get older, our natural melatonin levels decline. Tart cherries give your body a gentle, food-based boost to bring those levels back up without the side effects of over-the-counter pills. But there's more. Tart cherries also contain tryptophan, the same amino acid found in turkey, which helps your body create serotonin and melatonin. Plus, they're rich in anthocyanins, powerful antioxidants that reduce inflammation, which is often linked to sleep disturbances in older adults. Together, these compounds make tart cherries a natural sleep tonic, perfect for those looking to avoid synthetic aids. So, how do you use them? Try drinking a small glass of tart cherry juice in the evening, about an hour before bed. You can also eat dried tart cherries as a snack or mix them into your yogurt or oatmeal. Just make sure they're unsweetened. Added sugar can cancel out the benefits. One glass, one simple routine, one giant leap toward better sleep. And up next, we'll look at a fruit you already love that's loaded with a relaxing mineral your muscles and mind desperately need, especially before bedtime. Can you guess what it is? Now let's talk about a fruit that's been in your kitchen for years, but you may have never seen it as a sleep aid: bananas. Soft, sweet, and comforting, bananas are more than just a convenient snack. They're a natural sleep enhancer, especially for older adults who find themselves tossing and turning at night. Here's the secret: bananas are rich in magnesium, a mineral your body uses to relax muscles, calm the nervous system, and support deep, restorative sleep. And guess what? Magnesium deficiency is surprisingly common among seniors, often showing up as muscle cramps, restless legs, or just that feeling of tension when you lay down. A study published in the Journal of Research in Medical Sciences showed that increasing magnesium intake helped older adults fall asleep faster, sleep more deeply, and wake up feeling refreshed. But magnesium isn't working alone. Bananas also contain tryptophan, the same amino acid found in tart cherries and turkey. Tryptophan is the building block of serotonin, the feel-good brain chemical that later converts into melatonin, your body's master sleep hormone. That's why eating a banana about 30 to 60 minutes before bed can gently coax your body into a more relaxed state. It's like nature's bedtime snack. No pills, no side effects, just real food doing what it was designed to do. Even better, bananas are easy to pair. Try slicing one into warm oatmeal, blending it into a bedtime smoothie, or simply enjoying it with a tablespoon of almond or peanut butter for a dose of healthy fats and protein. This combo slows digestion and keeps your blood sugar steady, a key to avoiding those 2 a.m. wake-ups. So, next time you feel restless before bed, skip the pills and peel a banana instead. But we're not done yet. Coming up next is one of the most overlooked superfoods that combines melatonin, omega-3s, and brain-boosting power, all in a small, crunchy package. Can you guess what it is? Let's turn our attention to a humble nut that often plays second fiddle to almonds, but packs a triple punch when it comes to sleep support: walnuts. Most people don't realize this, but walnuts are one of the very few plant-based foods that contain natural melatonin, the hormone your brain uses to regulate the sleep-wake cycle. And as we age, our body's ability to produce melatonin naturally declines, making it harder to fall asleep and stay asleep. A study in the journal Nutrients revealed that participants who consumed walnuts had higher levels of circulating melatonin, improving both the timing and quality of their sleep. For seniors who struggle with falling asleep early or waking up too often, that's a game changer. But there's more. Walnuts also provide tryptophan, that key amino acid we mentioned earlier, the one that helps the body produce serotonin and melatonin. So, you're getting melatonin directly and giving your body the ingredients to make even more. And if that weren't enough, walnuts are a rich source of omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA, a healthy fat your brain craves. According to Harvard Health, DHA supports healthy brain aging and helps regulate your sleep-wake rhythm. That's why diets rich in omega-3s are associated with better sleep and improved mood in older adults. So, how can you get more of this crunchy little powerhouse? It's simple. Try a small handful of walnuts in the evening. Sprinkle them over a bowl of yogurt, stir them into oatmeal, or just enjoy them plain before bed. They digest slowly, stabilize blood sugar, and deliver calm, sustained energy, not that jittery spike you get from sugary snacks. The best part? They work quietly in the background, realigning your body's natural rhythm so you can drift off peacefully and stay asleep longer. Coming up next is a timeless bedtime ritual turned into a science-backed strategy, and it's something warm, calming, and herbal. Can you guess it? For generations, people around the world have reached for one simple remedy to calm their minds at night: a warm cup of chamomile tea. It turns out, this soothing bedtime ritual isn't just comforting, it's backed by modern science. Chamomile contains a natural antioxidant called apigenin. This powerful compound binds to certain receptors in the brain that reduce anxiety and encourage sleepiness. Think of it as nature's gentle sedative without the risk of dependency or grogginess the next morning. In a clinical study published in the Journal of Advanced Nursing, older adults who drank chamomile tea regularly reported falling asleep faster, waking up less during the night, and feeling more refreshed in the morning. And that's not all. Chamomile tea has mild anti-inflammatory properties that soothe the digestive system, a huge plus if you're someone who struggles with nighttime bloating or discomfort. It also helps ease muscle tension and calm the nervous system, making it easier to relax both body and mind. Dr. Laura Bennett, a sleep medicine specialist, often recommends chamomile tea to seniors as a first-line solution before reaching for sleep medications. Why? Because it works with your body, not against it. Here's how to make the most of it. Brew a strong cup of chamomile tea about 30 to 45 minutes before bedtime. Let it steep for at least 5 minutes to draw out the calming compounds. Then, find a quiet space, sit down, and enjoy it slowly. That simple ritual can train your brain to recognize it as a signal. It's time to unwind. Chamomile is caffeine-free, so there's no risk of late-night stimulation, just a gentle nudge toward deeper, more restful sleep. Tonight, instead of scrolling your phone or watching one more show, reach for a cup of calm. Sip it slowly, and let your body do the rest. So now you know, sleep doesn't just start at bedtime. It begins with the choices you make at your table. Let's quickly recap the 5 powerful, doctor-recommended foods that can help you sleep deeper, longer, and more peacefully. Kiwi, a small fruit with big benefits, boosting serotonin and calming the nervous system. Tart cherries, rich in melatonin and tryptophan, giving your body the signal it needs to sleep. Bananas, packed with magnesium to relax your muscles and help your brain wind down. Walnuts, a rare natural source of melatonin, plus omega-3s for healthy brain rhythms. Chamomile tea, a calming, caffeine-free ritual that gently guides you towards slumber. Each one of these is simple, but when combined into your evening routine, they become a powerful toolkit for better sleep. Now, I'm not here to say these foods will cure every sleep issue. Sometimes, deeper medical causes are involved. But for many seniors, improving nutrition can be the missing piece in the sleep puzzle. No pills, no side effects, just food that works with your body. So here's my invitation. Start tonight. Add just one of these foods into your evening, maybe a banana after dinner or a mug of chamomile before bed. Then notice how your body responds. Track your energy in the morning. Observe your mood. You might be surprised how something so small can make such a big difference. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Which of these foods are you already using in your nightly routine? Which one are you most excited to try? Let's start a conversation in the comments below, because when we share, we learn, and we grow stronger together. If you found this helpful, give this video a like, share it with someone who needs better sleep, and don't forget to subscribe, because we've got so much more coming your way. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of this growing, caring community. Take care of yourself. Sleep well. And until next time, good night and sweet dreams.